One of the highlights of the season of St. Patrick's Day is running down to the local McDonald's and grabbing a melty, minty, room temperature Shamrock Shake. I make soap, so I'm gonna find a way to turn this creamy festive dessert into something you can wash with. The Shamrock Shake is a really simple drink. It's mostly milk, cream, sugar, natural mint flavoring, and food dye contribute the minty pastel green character that the Shamrock Shake is known for. Keep in mind, this here isn't a true Shamrock Shake, because as a Canadian in the middle of a tariff war, I'm limiting my support of American companies. So I made my very own Soap Universe approved Lucky Shake, which has all the same ingredients as a Shamrock Shake, minus the shame. Let's give it a taste. I hate mint. All in all, I've never found the Shamrock Shake to be overly sweet, but I'm a bit biased because I consume a ton of sugar. I dislike the flavor, and I've always found it to be a strange choice to represent an Irish holiday, and I'll actually get more into that later when I make my cold process soap. Speaking of which, how will we turn the shake into soap? Let's go to the drawing board. Looking at the ingredients again, the ones we want to focus on are the milk, cream, and sugar, because the other ingredients are too small to make a difference. Are you serious? Cream and milk are composed of mainly butterfat and water. Luckily for us, butterfat contains fatty acids that can react with lye to make soap. Yay! So those two ingredients get the green light. But what about sugar? I've apparently got the luck of the Irish, because sugar is also a very popular additive in soap. Sugar helps create a really nice bubbly lather, so my Lucky Shake is really just primed to be turned into soap. I'll draw up a design. Staying true to the Shamrock Shake, the body of the soap will be a really nice minty green color. If it ain't green, someone's getting pinched. I'll pipe some white soap frosting on top to resemble whipped cream, and then I'll plop some realistic cherry embeds, sprinkle some green glitter, and garnish with a swirly twirly paper straw because nobody likes a milk stash. We're good to go. The first step in my soap making process is making the embeds, so I'm going to start with my OG melt and pour crystal soap base, which doesn't sweat, a must when you live in a moist climate. Since I'm making cherry embeds today, I'm going to cut enough soap to make roughly 6 of them. Then I throw those soap cubes into the microwave to melt. Once melted, I'm going to sprinkle in a tiddly widdly of titanium dioxide just to make my cherry embeds a bit opaque because I have not seen a transparent cherry before. To color my embeds, I'm using magenta and yellow liquid colorant. These colorants are essentially just pure dye dispersed in glycerin. Normally I would use mica powder, but I don't want these cherries to be shimmery. The cherry red I'm going for is mostly magenta with a little bit of yellow, so I'm going to experiment with the ratios until I'm happy. I know red colorants are hard to find in the soap making community, and they tend to lean a little more pink, so adding a bit of yellow should help fix that. I was aiming for that super fake vibrant maraschino cherry red dye color, which is sure to change the color of your bowel movement. This is the closest I could get without making the soap excessively dyed, because there's more dye in here than a funeral parlor, so I'm cutting myself off. Next step is to mold my cherries, and I'll do an acceptable job at overpouring every single one. I actually think that's to my benefit though, because sometimes melt and pour shrinks as it cools, so the more I pour, the merrier. I pour any leftover cherry into a cupcake mold to put in the closet and forget about forevermore. A quick spritzing of rubbing alcohol, and I'll let those bloody confections set. Half an hour later, my cherries are ready. You can definitely see a few of them are sunken in, so I guess that's a good sign that I'm bad at pouring. Let's pop them out and see how they look. Not gonna lie, it looks a little weird. Is this actually what cherries look like? Dun dun dun. Oh, it is. You know, a stem would probably complete the look, but I don't have any, so I'll just have to suck it up. Now that we've got our little garnishes ready to go, it's time to make soap. The color prep today is super simple. I'm just going in with some neon bright green powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of that. I pour in a little bit of my oil blend to make some paint, give it a twirl, and the Irish spring green is ready to go. I don't normally do this, but I've chosen to make my lye water on camera today because cool stuff might happen. Here I have my ice water as well as some frozen Lucky Shake, which I made without any food dye because food dye tends to be severely unpredictable in soap. If you want to see an example of a strange reaction between lye and food coloring, check out my grape soap video where I made a soap from actual grape soda. Go ahead and load it in a tab. Do it now. I'm mixing my lye crystals as normal and nothing interesting seems to be happening. As I mix it more, it does become a disturbing color. It also adopts a stinky feet smell, which often happens whenever I've mixed lye with cream. Rest assured, the smell eventually goes away. I hope. To my oil blend, I'm going to add a teaspoon of titanium dioxide because I want the entire soap to be light in color. In addition, I've modified my soap formula so it'll make a really white bar of soap. The formula is down in the description below as usual, but I also have a video on creating a pure white bar of soap if that suits your fancy. I blend up the titanium dioxide to disperse it cleanly throughout all the oils. I pour my lemon curd lye water into my oils using a strainer to catch all those little nasty curdled bits that settle to the bottom of the container. I blend for about 20 seconds or so, and that yellowy lye water sort of foiled my plan for having a really white bar of soap, but that's okay, it looks like Haagen-Dazs. I separate around 300 grams of batter for my frosting, and you might have noticed that I brought my soap to a far goopier trace than normal. I don't want to sit around waiting for my frosting to thicken, and I'm only doing a single color soap design so I can afford to bring my soap to really thick trace. I set the frosting aside and then add a little drizzle of my green. I made a minuscule amount of green paint because neons are potent and I want my bar to be pastel, but that green completely disappeared. So I went ahead and made a lot more, basically double what I made at first, and there we go. That brought it to the color I wanted. Nice and minty, ready for St. Patrick's Day. Speaking of minty, the fragrance I'm using is from Voyageur Soap and Candle, and it's called You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch. I know. But this fragrance will not be ruining anyone's holiday. It's a beautiful, fresh, sweet lemon lime Mountain Dew sort of fragrance.
Chris, that's not mint, and that makes me mad.
Well, hold on there a sec. Back in the 70s when the Shamrock Shake was invented, it was originally lemon lime flavored. It's a flavor I wish they would have stuck with because I dislike mint and I feel like it's more a December thing, but what do you all think? Would you be down for a lemon lime flavored milkshake the way the Shamrock Shake originally was, or do you prefer the minty flavor everyone loves? I emptied the entire bottle of fragrance, 30 grams, and mixed it in well. This fragrance, unlike its namesake, is ridiculously well behaved. The luck of the Irish is with me, I guess. You know what I say? Kiss me, I'm 48% Irish. Can we just take a second and appreciate that green? That's a perfect pastel if you ask me. I give it a nice little earthquake to level it off and set it aside to firm up a bit. Half an hour later, my frosting is firm enough to pipe with. To test the consistency, you want it to be able to hold peaks and ridges. It's actually very similar to the icing that you get in the tub at the grocery store, just a little thicker. I've prepared a piping bag with a 1M star piping tip, which will give me those lovely ruffly swirls that all those cheap whipped cream canisters come with. For anyone wondering, my frosting recipe is the same recipe I use for my bars, and I just have whatever formula I'm using for the bars to get the amount that I need to make for the frosting. In this video, I just made a 1.5 times batch and then separated out the 0.5 later. I know a lot of other soap makers prefer to make their soap and frosting separately because it gives them more control. For me, that's just more work and more stress and more dishes to clean. Anyone watching me has likely watched Katie Carson from Royalty Soaps, and she slays the frosting game. I'm basically just doing what she does, which is 3 rows of poofs on the first layer, then 2 rows on the second layer, and finally 1 row on the top layer to essentially make a pyramid of frosting. I like to do it all off center though, because that's my brand. For my embellishments, I have my cherries ready to go, and I've also cut some paper straws which I'll insert into the frosting one by one. Paper straws are perfectly safe to use in soap, just make sure to remove them whenever you want to use the bar.
Duh!
I'll put my lifelike soap cherries on top, and do these not just tie the whole design together? I wasn't quite sure about them at first, but now that they're in the soap, they truly are the cherry on top. Lastly, I'm gonna dust some emerald stardust on top. This is biodegradable glitter from the Good Glitter, which is completely safe to go down the drain. This mix in particular is a blend of hexagonal glitter and pixie dust, so it gives some nice variation in size. They also nailed that green. Good for them. I give the whole dessert a little spritz of rubbing alcohol to scare away any soda ash, and at last, my Shamrock Shake soap is ready to sleep and saponify for a planet's turn. I have really high hopes for this one, not gonna lie. It already looks so delicious and I want it in my mouth. 24 hours later, the Shamrock Shake soap is ready to cut. I wrapped it in plastic wrap because I noticed after a few hours, the soap was already pretty firm, because that's just the nature of my new formula, so I covered it to halt any evaporation so that the soap would still be cuttable when I need it to be. And because the loaf was so nice and firm, it comes out of the mold ever so cleanly. Sometimes you have to wait days for a soap to be ready, so this is refreshing. Let's slice them up and see how they look. I'll give you a little sneak peek of the bar because these bars are too much. I'll save my thoughts for the final shots, but look! At last, we have successfully turned the Shamrock Shake into a bar of soap. For how simple the bar is, I mean, it's literally just one single color. As a whole, it just works. I love that green color I achieved, and it's probably the first successful pastel that I've accomplished. The whole frosting section is the star of the bar. It looks so fluffy and scrumptious. Those cherry embeds turned out swimmingly in both color and shape. I love those green glitter sprinkles that tie the whole St. Patrick's Day theme together, and those straws are fit for a little evil leprechaun to slurp through. The bars also smell incredible. They have that delicious lemony lime smell that just permeates. I just don't know what to say, guys. I think I peaked. I call this soap Lucky Shake, a sweet and simple name for a sweet and simple soap. I love experimenting and playing around with weird ingredients and seeing how they affect soap, and this one totally surprised me. I did not expect a Shamrock Shake to perform so well, to be honest. Many a good tree grew on shallow ground, I guess. I'll have to remember to update you all on my community board a few weeks from now to see how the bar lathers, so keep your eyes peeled. In any case, that was the soap journey in the soap universe. Happy St. Patrick's Day, thank you for watching, bye.